This week on Vatican Connections, the Pope's summer residence is open to the public. The Venezuelan president goes to the Vatican, and the Church says no to the scattering of ashes after cremation. Hello and welcome, I'm Emily Callan. As the end of the Jubilee Year of Mercy approaches, the Holy Father continues his weekly general audiences on the theme of mercy, but more specifically on the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. This week he centered his address on welcoming the stranger and clothing the naked. In order to drive his point home, he recounted an anecdote, an event he heard of, which happened earlier this week.
Alcuni giorni fa è successa una storia piccolina di città. C'era un rifugiato che cercava una strada e una signora gli si avvicinò. Dice, ma lei cerca qualcosa? Era senza scarpe quel rifugiato e lui ha detto: io vorrei andare a San Pietro per entrare alla Porta Santa. E la signora pensò: ma non ha scarpe, come andremo camminando, no? E chiama un taxi. Ma quel migrante, quel rifugiato puzzava e l'autista del taxi quasi non voleva che salisse, ma alla fine l'ho lasciato salire al taxi e la signora accanto a lui. E la signora gli domandò un po' della sua storia di rifugiato e di migrante. Nel percorso del viaggio, 10 minuti fino ad arrivare qui, quest'uomo raccontò sua storia di dolore, di guerra, di fame, e perché aveva fuggito dalla sua patria per migrare qui. Quando sono arrivati, la signora apre la borsa per pagare il tassista e il tassista, l'uomo, l'autista, che all'inizio non voleva che questo migrante salisse perché puzzava, le ha detto alla signora: no signora, sono io che devo pagare lei, perché lei mi ha fatto sentire una storia che mi ha cambiato il cuore. Questa signora sapeva cosa era il dolore di un migrante, perché aveva il sangue armeno e sapeva la sofferenza del suo popolo pure. Quando noi facciamo una cosa del genere, all'inizio ci rifutiamo perché ci dà un po' di incomodità, ma puzza, ma alla fine la storia ci profuma l'anima e ci fa cambiare. Pensate a questa storia e pensate cosa possiamo fare per i rifugiati.
To rise with Christ, instructions on the burial of the deceased and the conservation of the ashes in the case of cremation. Such is the title of a new document released by the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith this week. Cardinal Gerard Mueller, prefect of the congregation, spoke to reporters at a press conference on Tuesday at the Vatican. Nothing new is mentioned in the document. The cardinal reiterated only the position of the Church on the matter, which is profoundly rooted in the belief of the resurrection of the body. That is why the Church, though not opposed to cremation, prefers the practice of burying the dead in the ground. Burial signifies hope in the reunion of the body with the soul. The document, broken down into 8 points, does remind faithfuls that the Church raises no doctrinal objections to this practice. Cremation does not affect the soul, nor does it prevent God from raising the deceased body to life. However, it doesn't allow for the scattering of ashes, preserving them in mementos, pieces of jewelry, or other objects divided between family members, or keeping them in the home. Instead, they must be kept in a sacred place. Pope Francis approved these clarifications. Next up is our Italian and Roman journalist, Matteo Cioffi, on the Pope meeting Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, and explains the significance of his unannounced and private visit.
Monday evening, Pope Francis received in a private and unexpected audience the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The meeting lasted 30 minutes and they talked about the aggravation of the political crisis in the South American country, an increasingly serious situation since now the president himself is being harshly criticized by people in the square. Just in the last months, the Pope sent 2 letters to the head of state to advocate a dialogue between the government and the opposition in Venezuela. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Vatican Secretary of State, stressed on several previous occasions the need for dialogue between the government and the opposition. This is essential in order to find solutions to serious problems the country has to face. Cardinal Parolin, as well as the Apostolic Nuncio in Caracas, Monsignor Aldo Giordano, have been very attentive to the political events unfolding in Venezuela, and have not denied the possibility of mediation from the Holy See, though it has not yet been convened. In the meantime, the Jesuits have elected their new Superior General, Father Arturo Sosa, himself a Venezuelan and an expert in the history and politics of Venezuela. Sosa, during his first press conference, stressed that we cannot understand what's happening in Venezuela if it's not clear that the country lives off of oil income, and this income is managed directly and exclusively by the state. A state of affairs which makes difficult the formation of a democratic society, generating a lot of suffering. On the question of oil, it must be remembered that President Maduro stopped at the Vatican after a trip to some member countries of OPEC, the organization of the petrol exporting countries, namely in Azerbaijan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. He was seeking greater collaboration from them with the goal of increasing the price of oil. The situation in Venezuela, however, continues to be very complicated. Perhaps a meeting with the Holy Father is the first step towards dialogue and towards what he has already done before, bridge building.
Pope Francis met with the General Congregation of Jesuits this past week in Rome, telling them their mission is to go to the peripheries where others do not reach. The Holy Father, also Jesuit, addressed the 212 Jesuits who are representing the nearly 17,000 serving worldwide. The Jesuit Pope was welcomed by Father Arturo Sosa, newly elected Superior General of the Society of Jesus, before offering them a reflection on the Jesuit or Ignatian way of serving God in the world. This is the way, brothers and sons. Forward, in nomine Domini, let us walk together, free, obedient, united to each other in the love of Christ for the greater glory. Pope Francis remembered these words of Pope Paul VI when he spoke at the 32nd General Congregation, and those of Pope Benedict XVI, who reaffirmed the Church's faith in the society. Pope Francis told them the Church needs you, counts on you, and continues to turn to you with confidence, particularly to reach the geographical and spiritual places where others do not reach or find it difficult to reach. He also recalled other Jesuit saints who remind them of their basic mission. In particular, Jerome Nadal, who said that to the Jesuit, the whole world is his home, and St. Ignatius of Loyola, who emphasized the works of mercy. In this Jubilee of Mercy, it is an appropriate time to reflect on these. Mercy is not an abstract word, but a lifestyle that places concrete gestures. Joy was also at the center of his talk, as well as spiritual consolation. The true work of the Jesuits, he stressed, is to console the people of God, to help them discern, so that nothing robs them of their joy. He concluded by telling the society that they never walk alone nor comfortably. Rather, they walk with a heart that does not rest. We walk, becoming all things to all people, with the goal of helping others. At the end of the Jubilee audience, he greeted Polish pilgrims who were in Rome for the feast of John Paul II and reminded them that exactly 38 years ago, at about this time, in this square, he said, there resounded these words to men and women throughout the world: "Do not be afraid, open wide the doors for Christ." John Paul II's heritage is what served as a basis for his whole pontificate. He finally encouraged young people, married couples, and those suffering to seek his intercession.
Non abbiate paura, aprite, anzi spalancate le porte a Cristo.
Do not be afraid. Open wide the doors for Christ. To his saving power, open the boundaries of states, economic and political systems, the vast fields of culture, civilization and development. Do not be afraid.
Di cultura, di civiltà, di sviluppo. Non abbiate paura.
It was fitting then for members of the John Paul II Foundation to be received at the Vatican the day before for an audience with Pope Francis. They were gathered on the occasion of its 35th anniversary. Present at the audience were Cardinal Stanislav Rilko, president of the foundation, as well as Cardinal Stanislav Dziwisz, Archbishop of Krakow, who once worked as Pope John Paul II's secretary. The foundation is a non-profit organization supporting education of young people, and Pope Francis said young people must never be robbed of their hope for tomorrow. The Pope mentioned the need to review what has already been done since the foundation was established, and in light of the Jubilee Year of Mercy, the Holy Father encouraged them to continue reflecting on mercy, which makes us aware that everything is a gift from God, and that true wealth is not wealth, he insisted, which indeed enslaves us, but love for God sets us free. He especially remembered his participation in the World Youth Days, where he experienced the joy of faith, and spoke about Poland, who gave the world 2 apostles of mercy. John Paul II, he said, reminded us that mercy, or love, makes itself particularly noticed in contact with suffering, injustice, and poverty, in contact with the whole historical human condition. And that St. Faustina urged people to look into Jesus' merciful heart so that they may be inflamed with compassion. He hoped his words and the examples of those 2 saints inspire the future efforts of the foundation. Similarly, the John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family marked the beginning of an academic year with a special visit to the Vatican and an audience with the Holy Father. Students and faculty members gathered in Clementine Hall to listen to the Pope's address, The institute was founded by John Paul II in 1981 at the same time as the Pontifical Council for the Family. And today, there are 11 campuses worldwide in the United States, Mexico, Brazil, Spain, Italy, Benin, Lebanon, India, South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia. The far-sighted intuition of St. John Paul II, who greatly desired the institution of this academic institution, can be better recognized and appreciated today in its fruitfulness and current relevance, said Pope Francis to the 400 gathered. Speaking about the modern culture, he warned against the dangers couples and families face today, namely individualism, denying responsibility for one another, indifference towards the common good, ideologies which attack the family structure, and poverty. It is also disconcerting to observe that this culture has a tendency to cancel out difference instead of resolving the problems that mortify it, he said. Rather, the Pope continued, the family is the indispensable bosom of the creative alliance between man and woman. He went on to express the Church's role in helping families rediscover the beauty and truth of this creative design. Going back to his exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, indeed, it is right to recognize that at times we have proposed a far too abstract and almost artificial theological ideal of marriage, the Holy Father admitted, far removed from the concrete situations and practical possibilities of real families. The Church must be close to families. Theology and pastoral concern go hand in hand, he said, and the task of the Church, which involves the Institute, must be rooted in the joy of faith and the humility of a joyful service to the Church. Castel Gandolfo, papal palace and traditional summer destination for popes. It has been a part of the Holy See's estate since the beginning of the 17th century, and the first pope to ever make it his summer residence was Urban VIII in 1626. It has been used by most pontiffs until Francis. And last weekend, the doors to Castel Gandolfo were open to the public. But who's to say it won't be used again for summer vacation by future popes? CNS has more.
Pope Francis has opened the doors to the Apostolic Palace at Castel Gandolfo, including the papal apartment with the bedroom where several popes have slept. Unlike his predecessors, Pope Francis spends his summers in Rome, rather than at the peaceful residence 20 miles away in the cooler hills of the Castelli Romani. Since he's not been using the palace, Pope Francis opened the gardens to the public 2 years ago, and opened a portion of the Apostolic Palace last year as a portrait gallery and museum. Now, pilgrims can visit the chapel and library, where retired Pope Benedict XVI met Pope Francis shortly after his election, and delivered to him the findings of his VatiLeaks investigation. The papal villa at Castel Gandolfo is also home to 62 acres of farmland, where workers raise free-range chickens, rabbits, ducks, and pheasants for meat, hens for eggs, calves for veal, and cows to provide milk and milk products like mozzarella and yogurt. They also harvest fruit and olive orchards and vineyards, cut hay fields, tend vegetable patches, and grow flowers and plants that sometimes are used to decorate the papal apartments and meeting rooms at the Vatican.
Castel Gandolfo was abandoned by the popes for nearly 60 years. When Italian soldiers took over the city of Rome, which was until then a pontifical state, Pope Pius IX refused to concede the Vatican and so remained in the Apostolic Palace until his death, calling himself a prisoner of the Vatican. His successors followed his lead until the Lateran Pact was signed between Italy and the Holy See in 1929. The treaty created Vatican city-state and gave back Castel Gandolfo to the Holy See. Next Monday, the Pope will be visiting Sweden from October 31st to November 1st. His trip has an ecumenical dimension since he will be participating in the commemoration of the Protestant Reform. On October 31st, first day of the Pope's visit to Sweden, is the official anniversary of the Reform. The same day, Lutherans celebrate Martin Luther. That day also marks the launch of a whole year of commemorations, and it is in this context that the Pope comes to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation, not forgetting 5 decades of renewed dialogue between Catholics and Lutherans. It is therefore an opportunity to recall these existing ties and the considerable developments that have taken place since. Upon his arrival to Lund, the Holy Father will be welcomed in an official ceremony at the airport. His first visit will be with the royal family of Sweden, and the first major event is the celebration of an ecumenical liturgy in the Cathedral of Lund. Pope Francis and leaders of the Lutheran World Federation will preside it together, and the Pope will then participate in another ecumenical meeting in Malmö with representatives of different Christian churches. The next day, he will celebrate Mass on All Souls' Day with Swedish Catholics. The meeting didn't come out of the blue, told Reverend Martin Jung, General Secretary of the Federation, to Vatican Radio. It is the result of a long-standing, deep theological dialogues and understanding. He pointed to the joint declaration on the doctrine of justification signed by Catholics and Lutherans in 1999, as well as an important report titled From Conflict to Communion, which traces the history of dialogue between both churches while recognizing there remains fundamental differences. The visit intends to highlight a common desire to heal past wounds and look to the future. We've heard a similar message from the Pope at an audience with Lutheran pilgrims a few weeks ago at the Vatican. The Holy Father insisted one of the goals of the commemoration in Sweden is to give a common Christian witness in the world today, which so thirsts for God and His mercy. Pope Francis often signaled to the responsibility of Christians to work together for the poor and the marginalized, to welcome refugees, and to defend human dignity. Although Sweden is a secular country, many parts of the public sphere are still anchored in Christian values. 60% of Swedes identify as Lutheran, but religious practice is very low, whereas the Catholic population is growing because of an influx of immigrants, mainly Chaldean and Maronite. The Bishop of Stockholm indicated that this reality has almost doubled the official count of Catholics in Sweden. Pope Francis is not the first pope to visit the country. In 1989, John Paul II went to Sweden as part of a trip to Scandinavia. And finally, the Holy Father named 2 new auxiliary bishops to the Archdiocese of Quebec City and will be assisting the Archbishop Cardinal Gérald Cyprien Lacroix. Both are priests in the Archdiocese. Father Louis Corriveau was pastor for the parishes of Saint-Raymond, Saint-Bernardin de Sienne, Saint-Léonard, and Sainte-Christine. He is originally from Sainte-Marie-de-Beauce and was ordained a priest in 1990. And Father Marc Pelchat, a former professor and dean of the Faculty of Theology and Religious Sciences at l'Université Laval in Quebec. He is originally from Saint-Samuel-du-Lac-de-Rolais and was ordained in 1976. Cardinal Lacroix expressed his gratitude towards the Holy Father for having nominated 2 new auxiliary bishops to the diocese. He says they offer rich and diversified experiences and will be an immense support to the mission of the diocese. The sick, the poor, as well as the unborn are all made in the image of God and worthy of the highest respect. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send them via Vatican Connections Twitter page at Vatican Connections. I'll be happy to answer them on our next episode. And that's all for tonight. Thanks for watching, take care, and see you next week.